3 in the morning. Deserted highway in Colorado. A lone trucker offers a ride to a strange figure standing on the side of the road. What seemed like a simple gesture of kindness turned into something Bobby Walsh could never have imagined, because that passenger wasn't human. Before we dive deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of tea, or just some water, and sit back as we begin this journey together. Through in the morning on an empty highway in the middle of Colorado, the kind of place where darkness swallows everything, where there's nothing but cracked asphalt, faded yellow lines, and the constant roar of a diesel engine cutting through the early morning silence. Bobby Walsh drove his Kenworth as he always did, one hand on the wheel and the other holding a bottle of cheap whiskey between his legs. 58 years on the road, 8 years of solitude, and the bottle was the only companion that never judged him, never abandoned him, never asked why he became the man he swore he would never be. His vision was blurry, but that wasn't new. It was part of the routine. Drinking to drive, driving to forget, forgetting to survive another day, another delivery, another night, unable to sleep without the bitter taste of alcohol burning his throat. The truck's headlights illuminated only a few meters ahead, and beyond that there was only emptiness. That immense emptiness Bobby knew well because it was the same emptiness he'd carried inside his chest for decades. No cars, no lights, no life, just him and his personal demons traversing the void. Then he saw a figure standing on the side of the road. Bobby blinked several times, trying to focus his alcohol-blurred vision. It had to be a hallucination. It wasn't the first time I'd seen things that weren't there, especially in the last few weeks. As the line between reality and delusion began to grow thinner, more and more blurred. But the figure was still there, motionless, just watching the road as if waiting for something for someone. Bobby should have driven straight past. Any sensible person would have. 3:00 in the morning, half drunk in the middle of nowhere, a strange figure on the side of the road. Every possible red flag was there, screaming at him to speed up and get away from it. But Bobby hadn't been sane for a long time, and honestly, he didn't even care anymore. His life no longer made sense. It didn't matter if something went wrong, if it was dangerous, if he ended up dead in a ditch around the next bend. Maybe it was even a relief. Then he slammed on the brakes. The truck groaned, slowing to a stop beside the figure. Bobby stared out the window, his hand still tightly around the bottle, his heart beating a strange rhythm that he couldn't quite pinpoint whether it was fear, curiosity, or simply the exhaustion of someone who's given up on everything. The figure approached, and it was at that moment that Bobby felt something different. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a strange sensation, as if the air around him had changed temperature, as if something invisible had passed through the wall of the truck and touched his skin without actually touching it. He opened the passenger door without even thinking. His mind was sluggish, drenched in alcohol and fatigue, unable to fully process what was happening. The figure stepped inside. Bobby turned his head to look sideways, but his vision was too blurry. Too blurry. He could see only outlines, shadows, something that seemed off. His skin looked different. His eyes seemed too big. Or was it just his imagination? Or was the whiskey distorting everything, and as it always did? He let out a bitter, humorless, lifeless laugh. Whatever, Bobby muttered, offering the bottle to the silent passenger next to him. Welcome to hell, friend. The figure didn't accept it. He just stood there watching silently as Bobby put the truck back on the road. As the miles began to pile up, as the dawn stretched endlessly ahead, and as it always did, Bobby drove on automatic. An hour passed then too. He barely grasped time, barely noticed the silent presence beside him, barely noticed anything beyond the crushing weight of his own existence. At some point, the alcohol fog began to lift. Not much, but enough for consciousness to return in small waves, bringing with it that unwanted clarity Bobby always tried to stave off with one more shot, one more sip, one more attempt to erase everything. He stopped at an abandoned gas station. Dim, flickering lights, a rusty pump, no sign of life. He got out to urinate behind the building. his legs shaking, his body tired from carrying so much invisible weight for so long. When he got back to the truck, something had changed. Sobriety was coming, and with it, insight. Bobby opened the door and looked directly at the passenger for the first time with his eyes even remotely focused. And then he saw it. That wasn't human. The skin had a different texture, almost translucent in the dim light from the dashboard. The eyes were large, almond-shaped, a shade Bobby couldn't quite place, but which seemed to capture and reflect every tiny point of light around them. The proportions of the face were off, subtly off enough so that Bobby's brain screamed that this wasn't normal, wasn't possible, wasn't real. He should have felt fear, terror, panic, any normal human reaction to the impossible. But all Bobby felt was a hollow, listless curiosity, as if his ability to care about anything had long since been exhausted. "You're real," Bobby said, and it wasn't a question. "I've finally lost my mind." The being didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached out and lightly touched Bobby's shoulder. And then the world changed. Not visually, nothing around him changed, but something inside Bobby opened, as if a door that had been locked for decades had been gently pushed open, revealing a space he hadn't even known existed. A wave of heat coursed through her body. It wasn't physical. It was something deeper, something stranger. And along with the heat came silence, absolute mental silence. For the first time in decades, Bobby didn't hear the voice of guilt hammering in his head. He didn't feel the crushing weight of self-loathing. He didn't experience the constant fear that had haunted him for as long as he could remember. Just peace, pure, inexplicable, impossible peace. Tears began streaming down Bobby's face before he even realized he was crying. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, as if his body was finally allowed to release all the pent-up tension from a lifetime of self-inflicted suffering. And then without sound, without audible voice, Bobby heard words inside his own mind. "You've been down in the dumps for a long time, Bobby Walsh. Are you ready to understand?" Bobby couldn't respond. He could barely process what was happening. But something inside him, something deep and forgotten, whispered an answer he hadn't known he had. Yes. And in that moment, looking into those impossible eyes, feeling that inexplicable presence, Bobby knew his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. If that was madness, then so be it. If that was real, then so be it. Because for the first time in years, Bobby Walsh felt something he thought he had lost forever. Hope. To understand what happened that night, you need to know who Bobby Walsh was. Not the broken man driving drunk at 300 a.m., but who he was before everything fell apart. Bobby grew up in a small town in Nebraska, the son of a Protestant pastor and a Sunday school teacher. His childhood was marked by church pews, prayers before meals, and a moral code so rigid that any deviation was treated as a mortal sin. He was 17 when his mother was diagnosed with cancer. Doctors said she would need constant care, that someone would need to stay with her, that the family would need to stick together. But Bobby was in love with the idea of freedom, in love with the open road, in love with the possibility of being anyone but the obedient son of a strict pastor who spent more time judging sinners than loving his own family. So he ran away. He hitched a ride from a passing trucker, left a short note on the kitchen table, and never returned. His mother died 8 months later, alone in a hospital, asking for the son who abandoned her when she needed him most. Bobby never forgave himself for that. In his first years on the road, he tried to justify it. He tried to tell himself he was young, that he deserved to live, that his mother would have others to care for her. But the guilt grew like an invisible tumor, feeding on every mile driven, every night alone in an empty truck. He started drinking at 22, just a sip here and there to sleep, then to cope with loneliness, then to silence the voice of guilt that never stopped whispering that he was a coward, a failure, exactly the kind of man his father always said he would become if he chose the world over God. Bobby became a functioning alcoholic, the kind of man who can deliver on time, who never causes trouble, who goes unnoticed because there's nothing special about him, nothing worth noticing other than the deep sadness in his eyes, which he hid behind sunglasses even at night. At 58, Bobby Walsh was a ghost. He had no friends, no family, no relationships. His entire life fit into the cab of a truck, a few old clothes, a bottle of whiskey, always half empty, and a crumpled photo of his mother that he kept in the glove compartment but never dared to look at. The roots became their prison. Nebraska to Colorado, Colorado to Wyoming, Wyoming to Montana and back again. Always the same roads, the same gas stations, the same cheap motel that smelled of mold and despair. Over the past few months, something had changed. The apathy Bobby had carried like a heavy blanket began to morph into something darker. He began to think about simply not waking up, about driving the truck straight off the road on one of the dangerous mountain curves, about finally ending the pain that had become so much a part of him that he no longer knew who he would be without it. That particular night, in the morning in the middle of Colorado, Bobby was at his lowest ebb. He'd had more to drink than usual. The bottle was nearly empty, and he was already considering stopping somewhere for another, even though he knew he was too drunk to drive, too drunk to be alive. His thoughts were a dark whirlwind. Memories of his mother, his father's face when he discovered he had run away, the words that were never spoken, the forgiveness that was never asked, the love that was never expressed. Bobby hated himself. He hated every decision he made. He hated the man in the mirror. He hated the life he'd built on lies and running. And most of all, he hated being too cowardly to even end his own suffering. It was in this state of mind that he drove without purpose, without hope, with no reason to continue other than the fact that stopping would require some kind of decision. And Bobby had long ago lost the ability to decide anything about his life. He glanced at the truck's dashboard. The speedometer read 75 mph. The gas tank was nearly empty. The road ahead was dark. And then he saw the figure. Bobby didn't even think about stopping. His drunken brain registered something on the side of the road, but it was his body that reacted automatically, slamming on the brakes before his conscious mind could question why. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was loneliness. Or maybe somewhere deep in his broken soul, Bobby Walsh still retained a tiny spark of humanity, a last vestige of the person he used to be before everything fell apart. He stopped the truck, and in that moment, without knowing it, Bobby was about to discover that hell was real. But first he would need to learn to see. When the figure entered the truck, Bobby could barely register details. His vision was too blurry, his mind too slow, the alcohol too thick in his blood. All he saw was a dark outline, a silhouette that moved outside toward the passenger seat. "Where are you going?" Bobby asked, his voice slurred, the words tripping over each other. Silence. Bobby waited a few seconds, then gave up. Whatever. He pulled the truck back onto the road, the roar of the engine filling the empty space between two strangers who didn't know each other. For the first few minutes, Bobby tried to rationalize. He was probably a drifter, someone whose car had broken down, or maybe a fugitive. The road in the middle of the night attracted all sorts of desperate people, and Bobby knew it well. After all, he was one of them himself. He offered the bottle of whiskey without looking away. "Want a sip, cold night." No response, no movement. Bobby shrugged and took another sip himself. "Okay, more for me." Miles piled up. 10, 20, 30. The passenger remained completely still, completely silent, and Bobby began to wonder if he had actually picked up someone for a ride or if his mind had finally crossed the fine line between reality and hallucination. He risked a quick glance to the side as he drove. In the darkness of the cabin, lit only by the dim glow of the dashboard, all Bobby could see was a figure dressed in what looked like a large coat or perhaps a cloak. The face was in shadow. "Are you real?" Bobby muttered, half talking to himself. "Or have I finally lost my mind?" For the first time, the passenger moved just slightly, a tilt of the head so subtle Bobby almost missed it. Something about the movement seemed calculated, cold. Bobby felt a shiver run down his spine, and for a brief moment, a thought crossed his drunken mind. What if this guy was dangerous? What if he was one of those crazy people who kill truck drivers to steal their cargo? Or the truck itself, Bobby's grip on the steering wheel tightened slightly. There was a knife in the glove compartment, but he was too drunk to react quickly if something happened. And honestly, a part of him didn't even care. If this silent stranger wanted to end everything right then and there, maybe it was even a favor. Bobby hadn't felt alive for a long time anyway. Sorry, Bobby said. I had too much to drink. Sometimes I get a little confused. More silence. Bobby focused on the road ahead. The faded yellow lines, darkness swallowing everything beyond the headlights, the steady hum of tires against the asphalt. Bobby picked up the bottle again, desperate for something familiar, something that made sense. He took a long swig, feeling the liquid burn his throat, and used the pain as an anchor to reality. Are you okay there? He asked, just to break the oppressive silence. Do you need anything? Water, food, nothing. Another 20. Bobby started to sweat lightly, but he couldn't tell if it was nerves or just the effects of the alcohol. The silence was growing heavy, uncomfortable. Who was this guy? Why wasn't he saying anything? Why had he accepted the ride if he wasn't even going to say where he was going? Paranoid thoughts began to form in Bobby's drunken mind. Maybe he was a fugitive. Maybe he killed someone and was on the run. Maybe Bobby was just another potential victim. But even so, he kept driving. Because deep down, dying at the hands of a stranger didn't seem any worse than slowly dying from the inside out, as he'd been doing for decades. He looked away again, longer this time, and saw the eyes. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a reflection from the dashboard hitting the passenger's face at a specific angle. But for a split second, Bobby saw the eyes, and they were big. Too big, with a glow that shouldn't have been there. A faint luminescence like that of a nocturnal animal caught in headlights. Bobby blinked. He looked again. The shadow had returned. The face was hidden. Fuck, he whispered, his heart racing. What the hell? Bobby shook his head, trying to clear his thoughts. It had to be a trick of the light, a strange reflection, or his eyes playing tricks after so many hours of drunk driving. It had to be that. Bobby forced himself to laugh, a nervous, humorless sound. Man, I'm sorry. I'm seeing it soon. I need to stop drinking so much. But paranoia was growing. What if this guy was really dangerous? What if he was waiting for Bobby to let his guard down? And the strangest thing, he didn't stop the truck. He didn't ask the stranger to get out. He didn't try to run away, because a part of Bobby, the part that had been slowly dying for decades, simply didn't care anymore. If this guy was a killer, so be it. If he wanted to steal the truck, Bobby had nothing left to lose anyway. His life had been worthless for a long time. But there was something else too, a strange curiosity. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond apathy and self-loathing, even if it was just superficial fear or paranoia. It was something. It was different from the nothingness he felt every day. Who are you? Bobby asked softly, his voice sounding more menacing than he intended. What do you want? And this time the passenger answered. It was a real voice, but strange, too calm, too soft, as if each word had been carefully chosen. Someone who sees what you hide, Bobby Walsh. Bobby nearly lost control of the steering wheel. His vision darkened at the edges, his heart pounding. He hadn't said his name. He hadn't. He was sure. How do you know my name? Bobby demanded, his voice cracking. Who the hell are you? The truck swerved slightly. Bobby corrected automatically, but his hands were shaking now, cold sweat running down his forehead. Real fear began to replace the apathy. How do you know my name? Bobby demanded, his voice cracking. Who the hell are you? There had to be an explanation, a driver's license on the dashboard. No, he didn't leave any documents visible. License plate. He didn't use one. Maybe the guy had gone through his things while Bobby was distracted. Or worse, maybe he'd been following him for days. The voice came again, still calm, but with something in it that sent a chill down Bobby's spine. You're scared, but you don't have to be. I didn't come to hurt. I came to show. Show what Bobby managed to whisper, his voice breaking. The truth about where you are, Bobby. Bobby took a deep breath, trying to control the panic rising in his chest. He had to think rationally. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe he was drunker than he thought. Maybe he'd fallen asleep at the wheel and was dreaming. Maybe he'd finally crossed the line into complete insanity. But the voice, the presence, the eyes, none of this seemed like a hallucination. It felt real, terribly, impossibly real. Bobby was silent for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. The guy knew his name. He spoke strangely, and those eyes, those eyes he'd seen for a split second weren't normal. But Bobby still clung to logic. There had to be a rational explanation. There always was. Look, Bobby said, trying to keep his voice steady. I don't know who you are or how you know my name, but this isn't funny. If you want to rob the truck, go ahead and take it. I don't have anything of value anyway. I don't want your truck, Bobby. The way he said it, so calm, so certain, made something stir inside Bobby's chest. It wasn't comfort. It was unease. So what do you want? I want you to stop running away. Bobby felt his blood run cold. Run away from what of yourself, of what you carry of the truth about who you are and where you are. Bobby shook his head. You don't know anything about me. I know more than you know, the voice replied calmly. I know you hate yourself. I know you drink to avoid feeling. I know that at night when you close your eyes, you see your mother's face asking for you. I know you believe you are doomed. The words hit Bobby like punches to the gut. He wanted to deny it, wanted to scream, but he couldn't because it was all true. How Bobby's voice cracked. Because I see it, Bobby, and I need you to see it too. The passenger shifted, turning his face fully toward Bobby for the first time. And even in the shadows of the cabin, even with only the dim glow of the dashboard, Bobby clearly saw what was sitting next to him. The skin was too smooth, almost shiny in the light. The proportions of the face were off. The eyes too large, too apart. And when those eyes focused on Bobby, he felt something he couldn't name, as if he were being seen not just physically, but in some deeper, more complete way. Bobby instinctively slammed on the brakes. The truck slowed sharply, skidding slightly, before coming to a stop on the shoulder. What the fuck? Bobby whispered, his hands gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white. What the... Are you... His heart was pounding now, fear completely overcoming his previous apathy. This wasn't a robber. This wasn't a fugitive. This wasn't human. You know what I am, Bobby, the creature said. Deep down, you've known since you saw me standing in the road. Bobby started laughing, a hysterical broken sound. No, 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 no. I finally lost it. That's it. I finally drank too much and my brain fried. He squeezed his eyes shut, breathing fast. When I open my eyes, you'll be gone. You'll be gone because you're not real. None of this is real. But when Bobby opened his eyes, the being was still there, watching, waiting. Touch my arm, the being said. What? Touch my arm. You need to feel that this is real. Bobby hesitated. His hand trembled as he slowly reached across the cabin. Part of him hoped his hand would pierce empty air, proving it was all a hallucination. Part of him prayed that was exactly what it was. His fingers touched the being's skin, and Bobby felt it. The texture was strange, not quite like human skin. It was softer, cooler, but definitely solid, definitely real. Bobby yanked his hand back as if it had touched fire panic rising in waves that threatened to suffocate him. This can't be happening, he muttered, running his hands over his face. This can't be real. But it is, the being replied. And you know it is. You can feel the truth of it even if your mind resists it. Bobby stared at the door. He could run. He could leave the truck and flee into the darkness. But where they were in the middle of nowhere. And besides, if that thing wanted to hurt him, it would have already. Why me? Bobby asked, his voice breaking. Of all the people in the world, why a drunk, broke trucker? Because you got where you needed to be. And where is that? At the absolute bottom, in the place where lies no longer work, where escape becomes impossible. Bobby was silent, processing those words. Part of him wanted to argue, to deny, to keep running. But another part, a deep part he tried to suppress for decades, whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly what he needed. "What do you want from me?" Bobby finally asked, his voice low, defeated. "Nothing. I don't want anything from you, Bobby." "Then why are you here?" The being was silent for a moment, those large eyes fixed on Bobby with something that looked like compassion. "Because where I come from, we understand something that humans have forgotten. We understand about pain, about choice, about what you call heaven and hell." Bobby felt something tighten in his chest at the words heaven and hell. He'd grown up hearing about them. Faraway places, judgment after death, salvation, or eternal damnation. "My father was a pastor," Bobby said, his voice shaking. "He preached about it every week. Hellfire, eternal torment, separation from God." He said, "People like me, drunks, cowards, who abandon their families, go there when they die." "And you believe that?" Bobby shrugged bitterly. "I don't know what I believe anymore. But if there's a place for people who deserve to suffer forever, I'm definitely on that list." The being tilted its head slightly as if considering those words. "Bobby, can I ask you a question?" "Whatever." "Ask, how do you feel right now at this moment?" Bobby frowned. "What do you mean?" "Describe what you feel inside you now." Bobby took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight in his chest, the guilt that never went away, the hatred he directed at himself every day. "I feel like," he said honestly, "I feel empty, broken, like I'm worthless, like everything inside me is rotten." "And how long have you felt this way?" Bobby thought. "Years, decades, maybe. Since my mother died, probably." The being nodded slowly. "And when you picture hell, Bobby, what do you see?" "Fire, pain, torment, being trapped in endless suffering. And that's different from what you just described." The words struck Bobby like a bolt of lightning. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out because suddenly, for the first time in his life, he understood what the being was saying and without having to say it directly. "You're saying that," Bobby began, but his voice trailed off. "I'm not saying anything yet," the being replied gently. "I'm just asking you to look, to feel, to stop running long enough to see what's always been right in front of you." Bobby felt tears burning in his eyes. He didn't want to cry, not in front of this impossible creature, but something inside him was cracking, breaking, crumbling. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "You can," the being said, "and you will. Because for the first time in your life, Bobby Walsh, you are ready to see the truth and how to get out of it." Bobby sat there shaking slightly, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. He stared at the bottle of whiskey on the floor. Nearly empty, his refuge, his prison. Then he looked back at the being. Bobby took a deep breath. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to run, to grab the bottle, to run away again. But he was tired, so tired of running. "If I agree to listen," Bobby said slowly, "will it change anything in my life?" The being nodded. "Let's keep driving. And while we drive, I'll show you something about yourself that you've always known but never had the courage to address." Bobby pulled the truck back onto the road, his hands still shaking. He didn't know what he was about to hear, but a part of him, a deep part he'd tried to suppress for decades, was desperate to know, even if it hurt, even if it destroyed everything he thought he knew. Because nothing could be worse than continuing to live the way I was. Bobby drove in silence for a few minutes, his fingers tight on the steering wheel, his breathing still ragged. The truck cut through the darkness of the empty road, and beside it, that impossible creature waited patiently. But the more Bobby thought about what had just happened, the more his rational mind tried to regain control. "That's ridiculous," Bobby said, suddenly breaking the silence. "I touched you, I felt something in my bones. But that doesn't prove anything. It could be a tactile hallucination. I read about that once. People who drink too much start to feel things that aren't there." The being did not respond. He just watched. And this talk about hell, Bobby continued, his voice getting louder, more defensive. "That's just cheap psychology. You're playing on my guilt, on my religious background. Any psychologist would do that. Do you believe that?" The being asked calmly. I don't know what to believe, Bobby admitted but immediately corrected himself. But I know there are rational explanations for all of this. There have to be. He accelerated the truck as if he could escape his own doubts by increasing the speed. You know what? Maybe you're some kind of military experiment. Advanced technology, holograms, whatever. The government does that on the all the time. Do you really believe that, Bobby? It makes more sense than aliens. Bobby almost shouted. It makes more sense than a creature from another planet randomly choosing a drunk trucker to have philosophical conversations about life and death. His heart was pounding now, not from fear of the being beside him, but from fear of the truth that was beginning to form in his mind, a truth he was not yet ready to accept. I need to stop, Bobby said abruptly. I need to get out, breathe clear my head. He slammed on the brakes again, pulling the truck to the shoulder so hard the tires screeched. Without waiting for a response, Bobby threw open the door and jumped out his legs, nearly giving out as they hit the ground. The cold, early morning air hit his face like a slap. Bobby walked a few feet away from the truck, hands on his knees, breathing heavily. This isn't happening, he muttered to himself. This isn't real. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to wake up and find out I fell asleep at the wheel and this was all just an alcohol-induced dream. But the night was real. The cold was real. The distant sound of wind blowing through the mountains was real. And there inside the truck, that creature was still sitting waiting. Bobby turned and looked at the truck. He could see the figure's silhouette through the windshield, motionless, patient. For a moment, Bobby considered simply walking away. Leave the truck. Leave the thing, walk to the next town, and forget any of this ever happened. But where would he go to do what? Back to the same empty life, the same drunken nights, the same crushing emptiness. Why are you doing this? Bobby yelled at the truck, knowing the being could hear him. Why don't you leave me alone? Why don't you just go away? The passenger door opened slowly, and the being stepped out of the truck. In the dim starlight, it seemed even more surreal, even more impossible. Too tall, too thin, moving in a way that wasn't quite human. Bobby took a step back instinctively. The being stopped a few meters away, respecting Bobby's space. I can leave, the being said, its voice echoing strangely in the vast emptiness around them. If that's what you really want, Bobby, I'll leave now and you'll never have to think about this again. Bobby opened his mouth to say yes, to send the thing away, to return to the comfortable safety of denial. But the words didn't come out. But before you decide, the being continued. I want you to be honest with yourself about one thing. What? Bobby asked, his voice coming out weaker than he intended. Are you afraid of me? Or are you afraid of what I might show you about yourself? The question cut Bobby like a knife. He stood there shivering in the early morning chill and realized with growing horror that he knew the answer. It wasn't the alien that scared him. It wasn't the impossible becoming real. It was the possibility of having to look honestly at himself. It was the possibility of having to admit truths he'd been avoiding his entire life. I don't want to feel this, Bobby said, his voice breaking. I don't want to look. Please don't force me to look. I can't force you to do anything, the being replied gently. No one can. That was always your choice, Bobby, to keep running or to finally stop. Bobby felt hot tears streaming down his face. But it's going to hurt. I know it's going to hurt. Yes, it will hurt a lot. Then why would I do that? Why would anyone choose to feel pain when they could just not feel it? The being took a few steps closer, and Bobby didn't back away this time. Because the pain you feel when you look is temporary, the being explained. But the pain you feel when you run away lasts forever. You already know that, Bobby. You've been carrying this pain for 40 years, and it only gets worse, never better. Bobby fell to his knees on the side of the road, sobbing openly now. All the walls he'd built, all the defenses he erected were all crumbling at once. I abandoned my mother, he cried. She was dying, and I ran away like a coward. What kind of son does that? What kind of person does that? One who is afraid, the being said, kneeling beside Bobby. One who was hurting, one who didn't have the tools to deal with what he was feeling. My father was right about me, Bobby continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. He said I was weak, that I was selfish, that I would go to hell if I didn't change. And he was right. I am all of those things. Bobby, look at me. Bobby lifted his head, his eyes red and puffy, and found those wide, impossible eyes fixed on him with something that could only be described as pure compassion. Your father was wrong, the being said firmly. We should about your actions. Your actions cause pain. That's true. But he was wrong about who you are, and he was wrong about hell. How can you know that? Bobby whispered. Because I see you, Bobby Walsh, not the version you show the world, not the version you hate. I see who you really are beneath all those layers of pain and guilt. And there's nothing rotten there, just a broken man who never learned to heal. Bobby wanted to believe those words. God, how he wanted to believe them. But decades of self-loathing don't disappear with a conversation, no matter how impossible the source. I don't know if I can do this, Bobby admitted. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You don't have to be strong, the being said. You just have to be willing. Willing to look. Willing to feel. Willing to finally stop running. Bobby knelt there for a long time, the most important decision of his life hanging precariously in the balance. Part of him still wanted to run, grab the bottle, bury it all again under layers of chemical numbness. But another part, a small but growing part, whispered that maybe, just maybe, there was another way. If I do this, Bobby finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, if I stop running away and really look, will you show me how to get out? How to stop feeling this way? I'll show you something better, the being promised. I'll show you that you never needed to leave. Because what you think is prison is actually the door. You just need to learn to see it. Bobby didn't fully understand what that meant, but something about the way the being spoke, something about the absolute certainty of that impossible voice made Bobby want to treat. Okay, he said, standing slowly, his legs still shaking. Okay, I'll try now. The being also stood up, and together they walked back to the truck. Bobby climbed in first, waiting for the being to follow. Once they were both inside, Bobby started the engine, but didn't put the truck in drive yet. One thing before we begin, Bobby said. Tree, if this gets too much, if I can't handle it, will you stop? The being looked at him for a long moment before answering. Whenever you ask us to stop, Bobby, we stop. This was never about me forcing myself on you. It's about you finally being ready to see yourself. Bobby nodded, put the truck on the road, and started driving again. This time he wasn't running away. He was heading towards something that scared him more than any alien could. He was heading towards himself. Bobby drove for a few more miles. The silence inside the cabin heavy, but not uncomfortable. He'd made the decision to listen, but there was still a part of him that clung to the last hope that this was all some kind of elaborate delusion. You still don't completely believe I'm real, do you? The being asked, breaking the silence. Bobby hesitated before answering. I, I don't know. I touched you, I saw you, but my mind keeps searching for explanations. It's hard to accept something so impossible. I see. Your kind relies too much on what they can see and touch. They need concrete proof. And you blame me, Bobby asked defensively. No, but before I show you what I came to show you, you need to be absolutely sure that this is real. Because if a part of you still thinks it's a dream or a hallucination, you won't absorb what you need to hear. Bobby frowned. And how do you plan to convince me? The being was silent for a moment as if considering something. Then he said, stop the truck. I need to show you something that will put an end to any doubt. Bobby felt a chill run down his spine, but he obeyed. He slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road again. This time when he turned off the engine, the silence around him was almost absolute. Only the distant sound of the wind cutting through the empty expanse of Colorado. Get out of the truck, the being instructed gently, and bring your flashlight. Bobby grabbed the flashlight he kept under the seat and got out, his legs still shaking. The being got out too, and together they walked a few feet away from the truck to an open area beside the road. "What are we going to do?" Bobby asked, his voice sounding small in the vastness of the night. "You need physical proof," the being said. "Something that can't be explained by alcohol hallucination or human technology. Something undeniable." The being raised a hand to the night sky. Bobby followed the gesture with his eyes seeing only stars and darkness. And then something changed. In the sky, a light began to appear. It wasn't a star, it wasn't a plane. It was something else entirely. A soft luminosity that grew in intensity, moving impossibly changing direction at angles that defied every law of physics Bobby knew. "What the hell?" Bobby whispered, the flashlight falling from his hand. The light descended slowly, approaching. And as it got closer, Bobby could see that it wasn't just light. It was a structure, something solid with a definite shape, but impossible to describe adequately. It was as if his eyes couldn't fully process what they were seeing. The object stopped about 50 meters above them, suspended in the air silently, with no engine sound, no jet thrust, nothing to explain how it was there. Bobby fell to his knees, not from fear but from sheer shock. His legs simply gave out. He stared up, mouth open, unable to process what he was seeing. That's the words died in his throat. "My ship," the being said calmly. "I came in it, and now you know without a shadow of a doubt that this is real oil." The craft began to emit a brighter light, and Bobby had to shield his eyes. As the light dimmed, he saw patterns on the object's surface, symbols or markings that seemed to move, pulsing with a life of their own. And then, as silently as it had appeared, the ship began to rise again, accelerating at impossible speeds until it completely disappeared into the night sky, leaving only the stars behind. Bobby lay there, kneeling on the hard ground beside the road, shaking violently. There was no denying it anymore. There was no rational explanation, no conspiracy theory, no hallucination that could have created this. It was real. Everything was real. "Do you believe me now?" the being asked gently. Bobby couldn't respond verbally. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face again. But this time, they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of something bigger, something he couldn't name. Awe, terror, revelation. The being reached out and touched Bobby's shoulder again, and that same wave of warmth, that same sense of impossible peace coursed through him. "Bobby, stand up," the being said. "We have a lot to talk about, and you're finally ready to really listen." Bobby struggled to his feet, his legs nearly giving out again. The being held him steady until he regained his balance. "Why?" Bobby asked, his voice breaking. "Why show me this? Why prove it? Because what I'm going to show you now about yourself, about your life, about heaven and hell, is as difficult to accept as the existence of extraterrestrial life. If you didn't believe me completely, you would dismiss everything I said as delusion. But now I know you're real." Bobby finished, understanding. "Exactly. And if I'm real, then what I'm about to tell you is real too. It's not theory, it's not philosophy, it's not religious preaching. It's truth, Bobby. Truth about how human existence works. Truth that your species has forgotten. But that has always been there." Bobby looked back at the sky where the ship had disappeared. Part of him wanted to scream, wanted to laugh hysterically, wanted to run in circles, processing the magnitude of what he had just witnessed. But another part, the part that was listening to the being, was strangely calm, as if finally, after decades of confusion and pain, something was about to make sense. "Let's go back to the truck," the being suggested. "What I have to show you now doesn't require ships or lights in the sky. It just requires you to be willing to look inside." They walked back in silence. Bobby picked up the flashlight from the ground, absently noticing that his hands were still shaking. When they got into the truck, he sat for a long moment before starting the engine, just processing. "Bobby," the being said, bringing his attention back, "is there any doubt in your mind right now about whether this is real?" Bobby shook his head slowly. "No, there's no doubt anymore. So now I can ask you, are you ready to see the truth about your own life as clearly as you just saw that ship? Bobby took a deep breath. The last part of him that wanted to run had been burned away by the impossible evidence he had just witnessed. There was nowhere left to run, neither in external reality nor in internal reality. Yes, he said, his voice steady for the first time since this journey began. I'm ready. Show me. The being nodded. Then let's start with the most important question you have never answered honestly. What do you really believe you deserve, Bobby Walsh, and why? So the question hit Bobby like a punch because he knew the answer. He'd always known. He just never had the courage to admit it out loud. I deserve to suffer. Bobby said the words coming out in a hoarse whisper. I deserve every ounce of pain I feel. I deserve to be alone. I deserve hell. And why do you believe that Bobby closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 40 years of guilt crushing his chest? Because I abandoned my mother when she needed me most. Because I chose my own freedom over her life. Because I am selfish, a coward, and exactly the kind of person my father always said I was. Open your eyes, Bobby, the being said softly. Bobby opened it. Now listen to me carefully because what I'm about to tell you will change everything. You're right about one thing. You really are living in hell. But you're wrong about why, and you're wrong about how to get out. Bobby swallowed, waiting. You're not in hell because of what you did. The being continued. You're in hell because of what you decided to believe about yourself after what you did. And that difference, Bobby, is everything. Bobby fell silent. Processing the being's words, he put the truck back on the road, driving slowly now, as if speed mattered less than the conversation he was about to have. I don't understand, Bobby finally said. How can it not be about what I did? I abandoned my mother. It happened. It's real. Yes, it did. The being agreed. You made a choice when you were 17. A selfish choice motivated by fear and a desire for freedom. That is a fact. Bobby felt the familiar guilt tighten his chest. Then how can it not be about that? Because, Bobby, one action doesn't define who you are forever. But the story you tell about that action, the belief you build around it that defines you and imprisons you. Bobby frowned. Are you saying I should just forget what I did? Pretend it doesn't matter. No, the being replied patiently. I'm saying something completely different. Let me ask you a question. What do you feel when you think of your mother? Bobby didn't have to think. The answer came instantly, viscerally. Guilt, self-hatred, shame. And how long have you felt this way since she died? 41 years. And in 41 years, Bobby, has that guilt brought your mother back? Bobby blinked, confused by the question. What? No, of course not. Did it bring her peace? She's dead. She brings nothing. So the being continued gently. 41 years of guilt, of self-hatred, of self-imposed punishment, and none of it changed the past. None of it honored your mother. None of it did anyone any good. Correct. Bobby opened his mouth to argue, but he couldn't because it was true. 41 years of suffering and nothing had changed. Nothing had gotten better. But I deserve to suffer, Bobby insisted, his voice sounding less convicted now. I did something terrible. Who told you that? The being asked. What? Who told you that you deserve to suffer? Where does that belief come from? Bobby thought. Sinners must pay for their sins. Those who do evil deserve punishment. And you believe that I always believed. So let me tell you something about the Creator that your church never taught you correctly, the being said. And there was something in his voice that made Bobby pay full attention. What you call God, the Creator of all, is not a judge sitting on a throne waiting to condemn you. The Creator is pure love, infinite abundance, absolute acceptance. Bobby felt something stir inside him. But the Bible talks about judgment, about hell, about punishment. The Bible was written and interpreted by humans, the being explained. And humans, with all due respect, often project their own fears and need for control onto the divine. They created a God in their own image, not the other way around. So you're saying God doesn't punish me. I'm saying the Creator never punished you, Bobby. You're the one punishing yourself, and you've been doing it for decades. Bobby felt tears burning again. But I did something terrible. Yes, it did. And it caused pain. But Bobby, listened to me carefully. The Creator doesn't love you any less because of it. The Creator's love is not conditional. It's not something you earn by being good or lose by making mistakes. It's constant, infinite, ever-present. Then why do I feel so separated? Bobby asked, his voice breaking. Why do I feel so far from God? Because you chose to separate yourself, the being said gently, not physically, but mentally, emotionally. Every time you hate yourself, every time you punish yourself with guilt, every time you drink to escape yourself, you are moving away from the Creator's love, not because He has turned away from you, but because you have turned away from Him. Bobby parked the truck again, unable to drive. As he processed those words, they challenged everything he'd learned, everything he'd believed in his entire life. How do I get away? Bobby asked. Through your thoughts, through your feelings, Bobby. Do you know the emotions that separate you from the divine? Bobby shook his head. Anger, hatred, judgment, grudge, fear, guilt, especially guilt. These emotions are low frequency. They pull you down, separate you from the source of all that is good. And when you live in these emotions constantly, you live in hell. Bobby finished understanding, beginning to dawn. Exactly. Hell is not a physical place with fire and demons. Hell is an internal state of separation from divine love. And this separation is not imposed by God. It is chosen by you moment by moment through what you decide to feel and think. Bobby looked down at his hands on the steering wheel. They were shaking slightly. But how do I stop feeling guilty? How do I simply choose not to feel something I've felt for decades? That's the wrong question. The being said, you don't stop feeling guilt by trying not to feel guilt. You transform guilt by looking at it honestly and understanding it for what it really is. And what is she, guilt? Bobby is not divine punishment. It's a sign, an indicator that you violated your own values. You valued family loyalty, caring, and when you abandoned your mother, you violated those values. Guilt came to tell you this is not aligned with who you want to be. Bobby nodded slowly. That made sense. Guilt had a purpose. The being continued. It was supposed to make you stop, acknowledge your mistake, and do things differently in the future. But instead of using guilt that way, you turned it into an identity. Instead of saying, I did something wrong, you started saying, I am something wrong, and see the difference. Bobby saw it, and the difference was huge. So I'm not a bad person. You're a person who did something bad when you were young, scared, and without the tools to deal with an impossible situation. That makes you human, Bobby. It doesn't make you a monster. Bobby felt something begin to crack inside him like ice melting after a winter too long. But my father said, your father was wrong, the being interrupted gently. He loved you in his own way, but he was trapped in the same limiting beliefs that now hold you back. He believed in a punishing God because that's what he was taught, and he passed that belief on to you. So everything I was taught about heaven and hell was wrong. Not entirely wrong, just incomplete. Heaven and hell exist, Bobby, but they are not future destinations. They are present states. You create your heaven or hell by what you choose to think and feel. Bobby was silent, taking it in. It was a lot to process, a lifetime of beliefs being challenged in one conversation. You said the Creator is love, Bobby finally said. But if He is love, why does He allow suffering? Why does He allow people like me to live in internal hell for decades? Because the Creator gave you free will. The being explained you have absolute freedom to choose your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs. The Creator doesn't interfere with that. Not because He doesn't care, but because He loves you enough to let you experience, learn, and grow through your own choices. But what if I choose wrong? There is no wrong choice in absolute terms. There is only choice that brings you closer to or further from love, peace, and joy. And you always have the opportunity to choose again. Bobby looked out the window at the darkness outside. Somewhere in the distance, the first light of dawn was beginning to brighten the horizon. He'd driven all night, and in a way, he'd covered more than just miles of road. You mentioned shadows before, Bobby said. What are those shadows? The being nodded as if expecting this question. Ah, yes, the shadows. Bobby, this is perhaps the most important lesson I need to teach you. What are they? Shadows are the parts of you that you reject, the parts that you judge as bad, wrong, unworthy. And the more you try to hide them, ignore them, run away from them, the more power they have over me. Bobby finished remembering the being's earlier words. Exactly. You have been living your personal hell not just because of the guilt, but because of all the unhealed shadows you carry. And there is one in particular that is at the root of all your suffering. Bobby felt fear rise. Which one? Your shadow of self-condemnation. The 17-year-old boy who ran away. You hate him, Bobby. You hate him so intensely that you never allowed him to grow to learn to heal. You kept him frozen in that moment, eternally guilty, eternally condemned. Bobby felt tears flowing freely now because he deserved it. No, the being said firmly. He didn't deserve it. He was a scared child doing the best he could with what he had. And until you forgive that boy, until you embrace that shadow with compassion instead of hate, you will continue to live in the hell you created. How do I do this? Bobby asked desperately. How do I forgive something so terrible? I'll show you. The being promised. But first you need to understand one last thing about heaven and hell. What heaven is not a future reward for being good. Heaven is a state of union with divine love, and you access that state not through perfection, but through acceptance. Acceptance of yourself, of your flaws, of your humanity. When you stop judging yourself, when you stop condemning yourself, when you finally choose self-love over self-hate, I ascend from hell to heaven, Bobby whispered, understanding finally. Yes. And Bobby, you can start that climb now, this moment. You don't have to wait for death or the final judgment or anything else. Heaven has always been available. You just have to choose it. Bobby looked at the being, those wide, impossible eyes that saw him with absolute clarity. And for the first time in 41 years, Bobby Walsh allowed a different possibility to enter his mind. The possibility that he was not doomed. The possibility that forgiveness was possible. The possibility that hell was not eternal, but only until he decided to leave. Show me how, Bobby pleaded, his voice steady despite the tears. Show me how to heal these shadows. Show me how to get out of the hell I've built. The being smiled, that subtle, strange smile, but full of infinite compassion. Then let's begin. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, tinting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Bobby was driving more calmly now, the tension in his shoulders beginning to ease for the first time in decades. He was ready to listen. I will teach you something few of your kind understand. The being began about how human existence truly works, about the power you've always had but never knew how to use. Bobby nodded, waiting. Have you ever heard that thoughts create reality? Yeah, Bobby replied. But I always thought it was self-help nonsense. It's not. It's a fundamental truth of the universe, but not in the way most people think. It's not instant magic. It's something deeper. The being paused as if choosing his words carefully. Bobby, every thought you have carries a frequency. Thoughts of love, gratitude, joy, peace. These are high frequencies. They connect you to the Creator, to the source of all that is good. When you live in these frequencies, you literally live in heaven. And thoughts of hate, fear, guilt, these are low frequencies, the being added. They separate you. And when you live in these frequencies constantly, you live in hell. Not metaphorically, Bobby. Literally, your internal state, your life experience, your emotional reality, all of this is determined by the frequency at which you vibrate. Bobby absorbed that. So when I hate myself, when I feel guilty all the time, you are choosing hell moment by moment. And the universe, the Creator, does not judge you for it. It just gives you exactly what you asked for through its vibrations. But I didn't consciously ask for this, Bobby protested. I don't want to live like this. Consciously, no. But subconsciously, Bobby, you've been asking for punishment for 41 years. Every self-hating thought is a request to the universe. Show me that I am unworthy. Show me that I deserve to suffer. And the universe, which always answers, says, as you wish. Bobby felt a chill run down his spine because it was true. He had been asking for pain with every self-destructive thought. So how do I change this, Bobby asked. How do I change decades of mental programming through conscious choice to being explained and through facing your shadows? Let me show you something important about those shadows, Bobby. They are not your enemies, aren't they? Every shadow you carry, every rejected part of yourself carries a lesson, a key to your liberation. The guilt you feel points to your values of family and loyalty. The anger you suppress points to boundaries that have been violated. The fear you hide points to areas where you need to grow. Bobby had never thought of it that way. He'd always seen these emotions as enemies to be destroyed or buried. And when you look at these shadows that are being continued, when you accept them instead of rejecting them, something magical happens. They transform. Guilt turns into conscious responsibility. Anger turns into strength. Fear turns into courage. How is it possible? Because darkness is not the absence of light, Bobby. It's unrecognized light. Every shadow of yours has light within it. You just have to have the courage to look. The being turned to Bobby fully. I'm going to guide you through something now. Something that will hurt, but will also free you. Are you ready? Bobby took a deep breath. Yes. Close your eyes. Keep driving, but close your eyes inside. Go inside yourself. Bobby did as instructed, keeping his physical eyes on the road but turning his attention inward. Now the being said softly, I want you to picture that 17-year-old boy. The Bobby who ran away. Can you see him? Bobby hesitated, immediate resistance rising, but he forced himself deeper. And then he saw it. A thin, frightened boy, eyes filled with fear and a longing for freedom. I see, Bobby whispered. Look at it without judgment. Just see. What do you notice? Bobby looked, and for the first time in 41 years, he truly saw. Not a monster, not an irredeemable coward, but a terrified, lost child doing the only thing he knew how to do. Run. He's scared, Bobby said, his voice breaking. So scared. Yes, and what did he need at that moment, Bobby? What did that scared kid need? The tears began to fall freely now. He needed someone to tell him it was okay, that he wasn't bad for being afraid, that he was only human. And who can give it to him now, Bobby whispered. I can then give. Forgive that boy. Bobby hugged that shadow. Tell him you understand, that you don't hate him anymore, that he did the best he could. Bobby felt something break inside him, like a dam finally giving way. And through deep sobs, he spoke to the 17-year-old boy he had carried like a prison for decades. I forgive you, Bobby said, the words coming from deep within his soul. You were scared. You were just a child. I understand now. I don't hate you anymore. I, I love you. And the moment those words were out, Bobby felt something extraordinary. A physical lightness, as if a literal weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The guilt he'd carried for 41 years, which had become so much a part of him he barely noticed it anymore, was suddenly lighter, significantly lighter. What was that? Bobby asked, almost breathless. You just healed a shadow, the being explained. And there was something like pride in its voice. You looked at the most rejected part of yourself and chose love over hate. And in doing so, you transmuted darkness into light. Bobby felt something he hadn't felt in decades, something he had forgotten was possible. Lightness, peace, not complete yet, but a glimpse. A promise, but there's still more. Bobby said, realizing there's still pain. Yes, because you have more shadows, more rejected parts. But Bobby, you just proved to yourself that it is possible to heal them. One at a time, you can rise from the hell you built, and each one I heal. Your frequency rises. You move closer to the Creator. You leave hell and enter heaven. Not after death, Bobby. Now, while you live, Bobby drove in silence for a few minutes, processing the magnitude of what he had just experienced. A single choice to forgive and something fundamental had shifted within him. You said thoughts create reality, Bobby finally said. Explain further. How does that work? Your thoughts generate emotions that being explained. These emotions generate frequencies, and these frequencies determine what you attract into your life. Not magically, but through how you perceive the world, what opportunities you notice, what actions you take. So if I change my thoughts, you change your frequency. And by changing your frequency, you change your experience of life. That's why two people can live in identical situations and have completely different experiences. One sees hell, the other sees opportunity. It all depends on the frequency at which they are vibrating. Bobby thought back over his life, decades of self-inflicted misery. So I could have chosen differently all along. Yes, but you didn't know how. No one taught you. Your church taught you to fear God, not to connect with him through love. Your father taught you guilt, not conscious responsibility. You did the best with what you had. And now you know. And knowledge brings responsibility. From this day forward, Bobby, every thought is a choice. Every emotion is a choice. You choose heaven or hell thousands of times a day by what you choose to focus on. Is it that simple? Simple, yes. Easy, no. You have 41 years of programming to undo, old patterns that will automatically arise. But each time you notice destructive thinking and consciously choose a different one, you are choosing heaven. You are moving up in frequency. Bobby felt hope rise inside him, an emotion so strange he almost didn't recognize it. Is there a practice? Bobby asked. Something I can do daily. Every morning before you drink, before you do anything, you make three conscious choices. First, you choose a thought of gratitude, something, anything that you are grateful for. This raises your frequency instantly. Bobby nodded, absorbing. Second, you choose a thought of self-love, something you appreciate about yourself, not about your actions, but about who you are. This reconnects you with the Creator. And third, you choose an intention for the day, not an external goal, but an internal state. Today I choose peace, or today I choose love, or today I choose courage. And then throughout the day, you return to that intention every time you notice yourself slipping into low frequencies. And does it work? Bobby, this doesn't just work, it transforms. Within weeks, you'll notice differences. Within months, you won't recognize your life, not because external circumstances have necessarily changed, but because you've changed internally. And when you change internally, the outside world adjusts. Bobby finished understanding. Exactly, you're not at the mercy of the world, Bobby. You are the creator of your experience through your inner choices. You always have been. You just didn't know it. The sun was fully visible now, bathing the road in golden light. Bobby looked at it and felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child, or beauty possibility. One last thing the being said about the Creator. Try. The Creator is not far away, sitting on a heavenly throne judging show. The Creator is within you. He is the source of life that flows through you. When you connect with love, gratitude, and peace, you are literally connecting with God. So God has always been here, always. You were just looking in the wrong place, searching the sky for something that was always inside. Bobby felt tears of something completely new now. Not pain, not guilt, but reverence, awe, connection. I wasted so much time, Bobby said sadly. No, the being corrected gently. You needed this time to be ready. You needed to sink to absolute depth before you were finally ready to rise. It wasn't a waste, Bobby. It was a necessary journey. Bobby drove in silence for a few more miles, absorbing everything he'd learned. He glanced at the bottle of whiskey on the ground, still with some liquid in it, and he realized something surprising. He didn't want to drink. For the first time in decades, the desire, the compulsive need simply wasn't there. You noticed the being said smiling. The drink, Bobby whispered, I don't want it, because you were drinking to escape the shadows. But now that you've started healing them, the need to run lessens. Every shadow healed, the less you need anesthesia. Bobby grabbed the bottle and without hesitation rolled down the window and threw it out. He heard the sound of glass breaking on the road behind him. I don't need this anymore, he said firmly. No, the being agreed. You don't need to. Bobby drove until he reached his final destination, a warehouse in Denver, where he was supposed to make the delivery. The sun was fully up now, and for the first time in years, Bobby noticed how beautiful it was. Really beautiful. He parked the truck and turned off the engine. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They just sat there in the comfortable silence of someone who'd shared something profound. You're leaving now, Bobby said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Yes, the being replied. My work here is complete. Bobby felt a tightness in his chest, but it wasn't fear. It was gratitude mixed with something like anticipatory longing. I don't know how to thank you, Bobby said, his voice shaking. You saved me. Literally saved me. No, the being corrected gently. I only showed you what you needed to see. Salvation, Bobby. You made yourself when you chose to look instead of run, when you chose love instead of hate, when you chose forgiveness instead of punishment. That was all you. Bobby shook his head, tears in his eyes again. But these were good tears, tears of relief, of gratitude, of something he could only describe as rebirth. What do I do now? Bobby asked. How do I continue this alone? Do you remember the practices I taught you then? Gratitude, self-love, daily intention. Do this religiously. And whenever you notice low-frequency thinking, you stop, breathe, and consciously choose a different thought. At first, it will be difficult. The old patterns are strong, but with practice, it gets easier. Eventually, it becomes natural. What about the other shadows, Bobby asked? The ones I haven't cured yet. They will appear, the being said. As you heal one layer, another emerges. It's a process, not an event. But now you know how to deal with them. You look, you accept, you forgive, you love, and they transform. Bobby nodded, absorbing every word as if it were holy writ. Can I ask you one last question? Bobby asked. Of course. Why did you really do this? Why did a creature from another planet travel all the way here to help a broken-down trucker? The being was silent for a moment, those large eyes fixed on Bobby with depth impossible to measure. Because where I come from, we understand something humans have forgotten. We are all connected, not just on Earth, but throughout the entire universe. When one suffers, all feel it. When one rises, all benefit. There is no real separation, Bobby. Only the illusion of separation. So you helped me to help everyone. I helped you because you were ready and because your pain echoed through frequencies that reach places far beyond this road. The universe conspires to heal those who are finally ready to be healed. Bobby felt chills. So it wasn't an accident. You stopping in front of me. Nothing is an accident, Bobby. You asked for help. Maybe not consciously, but your soul asked. And the universe responded. I was just a messenger. Bobby looked out the window, seeing warehouse workers beginning to move around. His old life, his job, his routine. Everything was still there. But something fundamental had changed. He had changed. I'm going to miss you, Bobby admitted. You don't have to, the being said with that subtle smile, because I'm not really leaving what I taught you. What you discovered within yourself, that stays forever. The being opened the truck door and began to get out. Bobby felt a momentary panic. Wait, he said quickly. Will I see you again? The being paused. Half in, half out of the truck. Maybe if you need it, but I don't think you will, Bobby Walsh. You have everything you need now. How can I be sure? How do I know I won't fall back into old patterns? You can go back to being admitted. Honestly, old habits are strong. But now you have awareness, and awareness changes everything. Every time you start to slip, you'll notice, and by noticing, you can choose differently. Bobby nodded, knowing it was true. One last thing the being said before leaving completely. About your mother. Bobby felt something tighten, but it wasn't the crushing guilt it had been before. It was softer, more healing. She forgave you a long time ago, Bobby. The only one who never forgave you was you. But now that you've begun that process, you can truly honor her. Not through suffering, but through living well, by being happy, by being free. That's what she would have wanted. Bobby felt tears well up again. Buddy nodded. I'll try. Don't try. Do. And with that, the being got out of the truck and started walking away. Bobby got out too, watching the impossible figure walking between the parked trucks. And then suddenly he just wasn't there anymore. Bobby blinked. He looked around. No sign of the being, as if it had never existed. But Bobby knew it existed. He had the proof inside him. The lightness, the hope, the fundamental change that no hallucination could create. The following weeks were difficult but different. Bobby didn't drink, not a sip. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel a desperate need to drink. He'd craved it a few times, especially in the early days. But each time the urge arose, he'd stop, take a breath, and make a different choice. He began practicing the daily practices the being had taught him. Every morning before starting the truck, he would close his eyes and choose three things: gratitude, self-love, and intention. At first, it was strange, artificial, like he was faking it. But he persisted, and slowly, subtly, things began to change. He began to notice things he'd never noticed before. The beauty of a sunrise, the real taste of food when he wasn't drunk, the feel of fresh air in his lungs. Small things, but important. He started talking to other truck drivers at gas stations. Real conversations, not just mumbling. And he discovered that some people were genuinely interesting. Some even became something like friends. He called his brother for the first time in 20 years. The conversation was difficult, awkward, and full of long silences. But it was a start. And most importantly, he began working on the other shadows. They appeared just as the being had said. Memories, emotions, rejected parts of himself. And each time they appeared, Bobby stopped and did the work. He looked, he accepted, he forgave, he loved. And with each healing, he felt a growing lightness, as if he were literally rising inch by inch from the deep hole he had lived in for decades. It wasn't instant magic. There were bad days, days when old patterns tried to creep back in, days when he caught himself thinking self-loathing thoughts, but now he noticed. And by noticing, he could choose. 3 months after that impossible night on the Colorado highway, Bobby Walsh was driving the same route, Nebraska to Colorado. But everything was different. He wasn't running anymore. He was just driving. He was no longer numb. He was present. And for the first time in 41 years, Bobby Walsh didn't feel like he was in hell. I wasn't completely in heaven yet. There was still work to do. There were still shadows to heal. There were still hard days, but he was climbing. And that Bobby finally understood was what mattered. Not a final destination, but a direction. Not perfection, but progress. He looked at the passenger seat, empty now, but still carrying the presence of that night. And he whispered to the universe, to the creator, to that impossible being who changed everything. Thanks. And somehow Bobby felt the message was received. 6 months had passed since that impossible night. Bobby Walsh sat in a small Denver cafe sipping a cup of black coffee and staring out the window. It was a quiet Saturday morning and he wasn't working. For the first time in years, he'd taken a day off. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Because he was learning that rest wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, part of taking care of yourself. A man sat at the table next to him, a younger trucker Bobby vaguely recognized from gas stations. The young man looked exhausted, his eyes red, his hands shaking slightly as he held a cup of coffee. Bobby saw himself in that man, the old version of himself. Rough night, Bobby asked gently. The young man looked at him, surprised by the attention. You have no idea. I can't sleep. Not without. Anyway, Bobby knew that. Anyway, it meant alcohol or something worse. Can I sit with you, Bobby asked. The young man hesitated, then nodded. Bobby picked up his cup and moved to his table. My name is Bobby Walsh. Marcus, the young man said, shaking the offered hand. They talked for a few minutes about roots, about trucking, about nothing of any importance. But Bobby could feel the weight Marcus carried. He could see it in the lines around his eyes, in the way his shoulders hunched forward. Marcus Bobby finally said, Can I tell you something weird? Of course, 6 months ago, I was exactly where you are now. Worse, maybe. I drank to sleep. I drank to dream. I drank to exist. I hated myself. I thought I was doomed. Marcus looked at Bobby carefully now, something like recognition in his eyes. And what changed, Marcus asked quietly. Bobby thought about how to respond. He couldn't talk about the alien, the ship, the impossible conversation. No one would believe him. And besides, it wasn't about the alien. It was about what the alien had shown him. I learned something, Bobby said carefully. I learned that the hell I was living wasn't external punishment. It was internal choice, and that at any moment I could start choosing differently. Marcus frowned. It's not that simple. It's not. Bobby agreed. It's extremely difficult, but it's possible, and it starts with a choice. The choice to look honestly at what you're running from, at the things you've buried that you hate about yourself, that you've never had the courage to face. Marcus was silent, but Bobby could see the words were resonating. Each of us has shadows, Bobby continued, parts we reject that we hide, and the more we run from them, the more power they have. But when we finally stop and look, when we embrace those parts with compassion instead of hate, they lose their power, Marcus finished, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Yes, and you ascend not to some distant heaven after death, but to a better state here and now, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Marcus stared at his coffee cup for a long moment. Have you stopped drinking? Yes, completely. As I faced what I was running away from, and I discovered that when you heal the wounds, the need to numb naturally disappears. Bobby grabbed a napkin and a pen. He wrote 3 words: gratitude, self-love, intention. Do this every morning, Bobby said, pushing the napkin toward Marcus. Before you do anything else, choose something you are grateful for, something you love about yourself, and an intention for the day. It sounds silly, but it works. It changes your frequency. Marcus looked at the napkin, then at Bobby. Why are you telling me this? You don't even know me. Bobby smiled. Because 6 months ago, someone showed me when I was at rock bottom. And now it's my turn to pass it on. We're all connected, Marcus. When one rises, it helps others rise too. They talked for another half hour. Bobby shared what he could without mentioning the impossible part of the story. Just the principles, the practices, the truth about heaven and hell being internal states. When they finally said goodbye, Marcus held Bobby's hand for an extra moment. Thank you, Marcus said, tears welling in his eyes. I really needed to hear that today. When you feel like giving up, Bobby said, remember you always have a choice, always. And it's never too late to start choosing differently. Bobby left the cafe and walked down the Denver street, the sun warm on his face. He thought about that conversation, about how naturally the words had flowed from him. He was changing not just internally, but in the way he interacted with the world. Before he would have walked right past Marcus, he wouldn't have noticed. Or worse, he would have noticed and not cared. But now he saw. He really saw. He saw the suffering in others because he had finally looked at his own suffering. And instead of turning away, he felt compassion, a genuine desire to help. This was part of the climb, Bobby realized. As you heal, you naturally want to help others heal too. Not out of religious obligation or moral guilt, but because you understand on a deep level that we are truly all connected. His life wasn't perfect yet, far from it. He still had difficult days. He still struggled with old patterns at times. He still discovered new shadows that needed healing. But the difference was that now he had tools. He had understanding. He had conscious choice. And most importantly, he had hope. Hope that hell wasn't eternal. Hope that salvation wasn't a future external event, but a present internal endeavor. Hope that heaven was always available, just waiting for him to choose the right frequencies. Bobby looked up at the sky, bright blue and endless. "I'm going up," he whispered to no one in particular. Or maybe to the Creator. Or maybe to that impossible being who had changed everything. And somehow Bobby knew it was true. He was going up, and it would keep going up. One day, one choice, one shadow healed at a time. Bobby Walsh's journey shows us something profound about the nature of human existence. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations awaiting us after death. They are states we live in now, determined by our moment-to-moment internal choices. Bobby spent decades living in a self-imposed hell, believing it was a deserved punishment for his mistakes. But what he discovered changed everything. The hell we live in doesn't come from external judgment, but from how we choose to relate to our own shadows, our own wounds. Each of us carries shadows, parts we reject, hide, hate. And every time we choose to run instead of look, drink instead of heal, self-hatred instead of compassion, we are choosing to remain in hell. But we also have the power to choose differently. At any moment, no matter how long we live in darkness, no matter how deep we descend, there is always the possibility of starting to rise. The question remains, where are you now, in heaven or in your inner hell? And more importantly, what will you choose from today? Because just as Bobby discovered, salvation isn't something that happens to you, it's something you do. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one shadow healed at a time. What about you? Which part of this story touched you most deeply? What shadows do you carry that you're ready to finally look at and heal? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And if this story impacted you in any way, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to follow more stories that may awaken something within you. Because in the end, we're all on the same journey. From hell to heaven, from separation to union, from unconsciousness to consciousness. And together we can rise.